Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're not just going to flip through some dry, dusty rulebook of regulations. Instead, we're going on a virtual road trip, one that's actually going to fundamentally change how you understand road safety and the sheer mechanics of driving. We're diving deep into the science, the statistics, and the downright surprising realities of Swedish driving rules. I promise you, by the time we wrap up this journey, you're going to look at the road through entirely different eyes. All right, let's hit the road. Here is our itinerary for today. First, prepping your vehicle. Second, the human behind the wheel. Third, navigating towns and cities. Fourth, hitting the open road. And finally, surviving hazards and accidents. But hey, before we even put the key in the ignition, I want you to think about this number. According to the data, a staggering 60% of all traffic accidents are caused by human error. More than half. That includes honest mistakes, routine lapses in judgment, and, deliberate misconduct. Honestly, that single statistic raises the stakes for absolutely everything we're about to cover. The machine isn't really the primary danger out there. We are. Okay, let's kick things off with Section 1, prepping your vehicle, getting ready to roll. So a car isn't just a static object, right? It ages. And the Swedish rules absolutely account for this wear and tear with a pretty strict inspection timeline. A brand new car gets a bit of a honeymoon phase. Its very first inspection doesn't happen until it hits 3 years old. Then the second inspection comes at the 5-year mark. But watch what happens after those first 5 years. The interval shrinks drastically. Once a car is older than 5 years, it legally requires an inspection every 14 months just to make sure it remains roadworthy. Now, if you know Sweden, you know prepping a vehicle also means battling the elements. An engine preheater is an absolute must-have, but you can't just leave it running all night long. Check out this temperature breakdown. If it's a bitter minus 15 degrees Celsius outside, you need to preheat for exactly 1.5 hours. At 0 degrees, cut that down to 1 hour. And even at a relatively mild 10 degrees, you're still going to want 30 minutes of preheating. That's going to reduce both your emissions and the brutal wear and tear of cold starts. Speaking of emissions, let's talk about your wallet and the environment for a second. Get this. About 30% of all carbon dioxide emissions in Sweden come from road traffic. So our everyday vehicle choices play a massive role. There are some serious hidden fuel costs you should know about. Throwing a roof box on your car for a trip? That extra air resistance is going to bump your fuel consumption up by 10%. Driving a four-wheel drive? Or just blasting the AC or heater? Add another 5 to 10% for each of those. But there's the silver lining here. Sticking to your regular engine servicing actually reduces your fuel consumption by 5 to 10%. So it literally pays to keep your car in shape. Moving right along to Section 2, the human behind the wheel. You are the engine. Now this one is wild. One of our most shocking physical limitations is actually our vision. Our eyes provide our brain with about 90% of all the information we need to drive. But when you look at that windshield, your peripheral vision makes up 98 to 99% of your field of view. Your direct, focused, crystal clear vision, it is a microscopic 1 to 2% sliver of what you see. Think about that. You're basically piloting a 2-ton machine at high speeds using a tiny little spotlight of clear vision inside a massive, massive room of blurry movement. And what actually happens when that tiny sliver of direct vision finally spots a hazard? One single second. That is the average driver's reaction time. Now, 1 second might sound incredibly fast if you're just sitting on your couch right now, but on a highway, a single second is a literal eternity. At high speeds, that 1 second is the exact difference between stopping safely and a catastrophic life or death collision. And keep in mind that 1 second reaction time assumes you're totally sober. Let's demystify alcohol content for a minute and look at how standard drinks translate into 40% hard spirits. A single normal glass of wine, about 15 centiliters, is the equivalent of almost 5 centiliters of pure spirits. A full-strength beer? 4.5 centiliters. It is just way too easy to underestimate how much actual potent alcohol you're dumping into your bloodstream with just a casual drink at dinner. And the consequences of underestimating that, they cascade incredibly fast. Let's trace it out. It starts pretty subtly, between 0.1 and 0.4 per mil. Lowered inhibitions, feeling a bit overconfident. But by the time you hit 0.4 to 1.0, your crucial vision and coordination are genuinely impaired. Past 1.0, now you're dealing with double vision and total clumsiness. And anything beyond 2.0, you are literally risking deep sleep, coma, or death. This cascade right here is exactly why the limit for drunk driving in Sweden is a super strict 0.2 per mil. And sadly, it's a huge reason why 20 to 30% of all drivers killed in traffic were affected by alcohol. All right, let's shift gears. Section 3, navigating towns and cities, the urban jungle. once we get into the city, speed becomes the ultimate deciding factor in survivability. And the contrast here is just stark. If you hit an unprotected pedestrian going 30 kilometers per hour, the risk of that person dying is 10%. But if you just increase your speed to the standard urban limit of 50 kilometers per hour, that fatality risk skyrockets to 80%. Let that sink in. A measly 20 kilometer per hour difference transforms a highly survivable accident into a highly fatal one for a human body. And that high risk is exactly why urban parking restrictions are so intense. You cannot park closer than 20 meters before a bus stop, 5 meters after a bus stop, and 10 meters before a pedestrian crossing. These aren't just annoying pieces of city bureaucracy, right? They exist entirely to protect our line of sight. Remember that tiny 1 to 2% of direct vision we talked about? Well, considering 30% of vehicle-pedestrian accidents happen near pedestrian crossings, keeping those zones totally clear of parked cars is the only way to give drivers a fighting chance to spot people stepping off the curb. Next up, Section 4, hitting the open road, speed and space. We've all been there, right? Out on the highway, it's super tempting to push the pedal down just a little bit more to get there faster. But let's actually do the math. If you increase your average speed by 10 kilometers per hour when you're already going above 90, you only save about 30 seconds for every 10 kilometers you travel. Just 30 seconds. It really highlights the absolute absurdity of risking your life, the lives of your passengers, and your driver's license just to shave a microscopic amount of time off your road trip. Now, because you're traveling so much faster out on these roads, if something does go wrong, you have to give other drivers a massive heads up. If you're forced to make an emergency stop, the rules mandate placing your warning triangle 50 to 100 meters behind your car. And if you happen to break down just after a hilltop or a really sharp curve, you've got to walk all the way back and place that triangle at least 100 meters away before the blind spot even begins. They need that distance for reaction time, plain and simple. Speaking of needing distance to stop, check this out. 600 to 1500. That is the staggering braking distance in meters for a high-speed train. We're talking up to 1.5 kilometers just to bring that massive thing to a complete halt. This brutal physical reality is exactly why parking within 30 meters of a level crossing is entirely prohibited. You just cannot risk blocking a path where a vehicle physically cannot stop for you, no matter how hard they pull the brakes. Finally, we reach Section 5, surviving hazards and accidents, when things go wrong. So driving in the dark is incredibly dangerous. Your accident risk is actually 2 to 3 times greater. Look at the math behind this. If you're driving with dipped headlights, you are only going to see a pedestrian in dark clothing from about 25 meters away. Bright clothing helps, bumping that up to 60 meters. But wearing a simple, cheap reflector, that exponentially increases nighttime survival. It makes a pedestrian visible from 125 meters away against those headlights. That is literally the difference between braking safely and an absolute tragedy. Let's circle back to that terrifying stat from the very beginning. 60% of all accidents are caused by human error, compared to just 40% from other factors like bad weather or mechanical failures. It is a really stark reminder that mistakes, routine lapses in attention, and deliberate misconduct make up the vast majority of the danger out there on the road. And honestly, a lot of that human error comes from just misunderstanding the environment. Winter in Sweden, for example, is full of invisible hazards. Sure, winter tires are legally required between December 1st and March 31st when winter conditions apply, but look closely at how temperature actually works. Roads can become dangerously slick with frost long before the thermometer hits freezing, starting at +4 degrees Celsius. And the absolute peak risk for devastating freezing rain, that sits right at exactly 0 degrees. Ice doesn't care if it's technically above freezing. Ultimately, it all boils down to driver behavior. Which leads us to one of the most sobering statistics in this entire explainer. Just 15% of the population is involved in 50% of all traffic accidents. It's crazy, right? A remarkably small fraction of reckless, uneducated, or just totally inattentive drivers are causing half the chaos on our roads. So, what does this all mean for us? It brings us to the end of our virtual road trip, and it leaves us with a pretty critical question to chew on. Knowing that human error causes 60% of all accidents, and having just seen the incredibly tight limits of human vision, our reaction times, and the brutal physics of the road, are you truly ready to take ultimate responsibility behind the wheel? These rules aren't just there to be memorized so you can pass a test. They're literally the framework for survival. Thanks so much for hanging out with me on this explainer, and hey, stay safe out there on the roads.